Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. My very special guest today is Miss Charlotte Dudley, who is a special education advocate in the DFW. How you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me on the show tonight.
I appreciate you coming on. So, if anybody who has neurodivergent special education kids knows that getting services for them can be complicated, can be a difficult process, and sometimes maddening. The system is just huge and complicated, and so people like Charlotte Dudley are wonderful because they go in there and they learn all these laws and all these things that your kid is entitled to, and they help you with that. And so that is a very special thing in my heart. I've had advocates in the past, and I've had to advocate for special needs kids. So I wanted somebody from the DFW area who has dealt with local schools to come in and talk about special education. So thank you so much for coming on. Can you talk about yourself? Give me a little bio. What led to this journey of special education and becoming an advocate?
Actually, I taught special education for several years. I
Wow.
started out working with adults with special needs in like a group home or workshop kind of setting. And then I moved into special education. My specialty was behavior disorders. So that was what my master's was in, was special education for emotional disturbance. And then, as you know, I'd been teaching and had my own children. I had a daughter that had some special education service needs, and just trying to advocate for her in a school that I even taught at as a special ed teacher was very, very difficult. So, years later, I had an opportunity to work with a lawyer who hired me on as a special ed advocate and learned a ton from her, and then was able to kind of branch out on my own and start the business. So it's something I had thought about for years and years, but um, it took me a while to get there, and thankfully so, because I got a lot of experience along the way.
It is a journey. There's a lot you got to learn. So, folks, you can contact her if you need any help. I got it scrolling down there. That's her website, and you can email her, call her, and book a 30-minute appointment. I believe is what you have on your site. Um, what has been the most rewarding part of this journey you've gone on?
So, I love it when I've been able to educate parents or inspire them, through just being able to learn more themselves, so that they kind of work me out of a job, right? That they find out the things that they didn't know, and how to find out more about what they need to know, and then kind of take off from there, and are able to, they feel confident, moving forward. I mean, I'm always happy to walk the journey with them all the way through, but and at any time if they ever wanted to bring me back in. But when just seeing them feel more empowered themselves is pretty inspirational. Just to be able to get them on the right path.
And it's because it's a lot. You advocates actually have to get special training, don't you? Like if you want to call yourself an advocate and advocate for special education, like a consulting, you got to kind of get, there's like different things you got to take, right?
You would think so. And right now in Texas, there is no, thing that you have to do to kind of, hang that sign on your wall. But a lot of the advocates do join COPA, which is the Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys, to receive training. They have a pretty extensive training program through their, um, uh, I guess, just through their program. I mean, that comes out every year, and you're able to sign up for that course, and it is pretty exceptional. And then there's also other ones like that are popping up. Um, I went to William and Mary and did their Institute of Special Education advocacy training through them with Pete Wright, who's an amazing presenter, that a lot of people will use for his books. So, I mean, I encourage anybody that's hiring an advocate to kind of look it up, see what their credentials are, see what they've invested in learning, because, like I said, anybody could just hang the sign up on their wall, but a lot of us are really trying to make sure that we have the education, and that we're continuously learning, and that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well, that yeah, I could only imagine just from what I've done, and I mean, it required so much reading, so much looking at all these different things. So, how would you describe the current state of special education in the DFW with the parents that you're helping and the school district you're dealing with?
I think, there's always challenges with special education, but I think one of the biggest challenges we have is just having certified personnel there to work with our kids. I mean, ever since COVID, and everybody says after COVID or since COVID, but it's true. I mean, we just have a hard time finding certified teachers out there. So I have classrooms in some districts that have not had a certified teacher in the last 4 years. They've had long-term substitutes. It's kind of glorified babysitting. Nobody's trained on the special needs of these particular kids, and it's horrible. I have a student right now that I'm working with who has communication issues, but they have not been able to hire a speech and language pathologist for the school yet. So the school will owe this child compensatory services for all the time he's missed not having 90 minutes of speech since school started. But we got to find somebody certified to be able to provide the services. So that's one of our biggest challenges right now is just, getting getting teachers that are trained and that know how to work with the kiddos back in the
Wow,
schools.
that is scary. Now, when a parent comes, and I definitely want to go a little bit into the process because there's a lot of parents that come online in the local sites and they have no idea what to do. Like they have zero, they're just, oh my God, my kids might have an issue. So when a parent finds out that something may be going on, okay, what are the first steps for them to get help from the school and
Mhm.
get started?
So really they need to start talking to the school about it right away. And I always encourage to start those conversations in writing. So if you are suspecting that your child has a reading disability or they a math disability, or they're just having a hard time learning, or the ADHD, you can even see maybe that attention and focus is just preventing them from really doing what they need to do. And that's when you start sending emails and saying, hey, I'd like to have my child evaluated in the following areas. And that should prompt people to start the process. They have a timeline, to do these things. So you want to start prompting that timeline to get some conversations about when we're going to do those evaluations. But ask for those evaluations.
So they just can't push off and say, "Well, we're doing RTIs," and those should be. They can't do that, right?
No, they can, but they really need to put that in. They have to put it in writing. A prior written notice saying we're not going to evaluate your child for these reasons. And I think our school districts, they don't want to be caught 2 years later having refused to evaluate and there really being a need. So they typically do step up at that point and go ahead and do that evaluation because there might be something there and they don't want to have missed it. Right. So, but if they refuse, I mean, and that they will, I mean, they might somebody might push back. And if a parent doesn't know, they don't know what they don't know. Right. So they don't know to push back on that evaluation. They don't know to say, no, I mean, if you're refusing to evaluate my child, I need to see prior written notice. Please put that in writing.
Oh, and that's one thing I will tell you, parents. Everything is in writing. Everything is got to be in writing. There's no voice because voice won't protect your child. Just a handshake won't protect your child. It's all got to be on paper. So what's the difference between like 504 and special education? Because you'll see those thrown. I know the difference, but parents may not. Can you tell me
Mhm.
about that?
Absolutely. So a 504 plan falls under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is supposed to give equal access to the environment for everybody. So it can go for a work environment or a school environment, but a 504 is really the accommodations that your child needs to be able to access the classroom. A lot of it might be under a medical thing. Some of my students have had diabetes and need some special accommodations in order to be able to stay in gen ed and stay in the classes that they need to be in. Others, it might be, you know, ADHD, and they have accommodations. It's not affecting their learning. They don't need modified instruction or goals like in an IEP, but they do need a lot of accommodations to be able to access it. On the
Oh,
other hand, an IEP is where we need some specially designed instruction put in place in addition to accommodations. So that is why dyslexia was recently moved into an IEP, as it should have been years and years ago, because the child is being removed from gen ed for specially designed instruction. So that's where that special ed part is different. They might need specially designed instruction in social skills. They might need it in math. They might need it in just anything you can think of. But there is some kind of instruction that needs to be added into their plan.
do the schools diagnose your kid, or do you have to go somewhere outside of it? And what is the best thing to do in that situation where you go outside of it to make sure that you have what you need for the school to do the right thing?
So, well, okay, there's always going to be if a diagnosis sounds medical, and there are some diagnoses that have to be done by a doctor. So ADHD is one of those. It's a medical diagnosis. The school can't diagnose that for you. And there's some of those, are going to be diagnosed outside. The school, what they're going to be looking at is they're going to be looking at the 13 eligibilities under special education and whether or not a child fits into those, or qualifies as a student with any one of those 13 eligibilities. So the initial part is that full individualized evaluation is they're going to be looking at how what's going on with your kiddo is affecting their education. And so it's an educational evaluation coming from the school. If the school does an evaluation and you don't agree with what they came up with, maybe you got an outside diagnosis of autism from your doctor, but the school says, yeah, no, we're not going to recognize autism as one of the eligibilities because it's not affecting their education, and you disagree with that, then you could go outside and get another educational evaluation we call it an IEE, an individualized educational evaluation at public expense. So parents have an opportunity to get a second opinion, to see somebody else, but the school will always fight between, well, that's a medical diagnosis, but we need to look at it in an educational way.
Oh,
So
they'll split the two. That
they
is a
will,
child. Oh, wow.
yeah, and we have some even very, very high functioning kiddos that are on the autism spectrum. And so it's really not affecting their education. So yeah, they may be a student with autism, but at school they don't need specially designed instruction in order to participate. So
And that's up to, like, you got to try to advocate on that as far as it, because I know that there's different levels. The spectrum is huge when
mhm.
it comes to autism. I have an autistic daughter, and I know that it goes swing. My daughter is very high functioning, but there are some learning disabilities in that. So when they divide it and you got your kid needs a service, you said something that I want you to clarify with the schools at public expense, because I've seen a lot of parents go, oh, the school didn't, what do I do now? I gotta get them evaluated. How does that work?
Okay. So the school has, I always say that they have like the first bite out of the apple, right? They get to do an evaluation first for the educational evaluation. So say you suspect that your child has autism or has a learning disability or dyslexia, whatever you're suspecting, you would take that to the school, ask them to do the evaluation, and they do it. You come back and you don't agree. They say, nope, this child is not dyslexic, but there's something still really wrong. They're just not identifying it. They have ADHD, and that's what's affecting their learning. It has nothing to do with the fact that they can't read. So you're like, oh, I disagree. That's when you can ask the school district for an IEE, independent educational evaluation at public expense. So this is where the school would come back to you and say, okay, Here's a list of parameters. Whoever you choose has to have at least these qualifications. They may or may not want you to get it approved through them, whoever you've chosen. They even are supposed to provide you a list of options,
Oh,
but you don't have to use their list. You could still go with whoever you want to go with, as long as they meet the criteria for an educational evaluation. And then you would go forth and get that evaluation that way.
can they
A
say
lot of
no?
hmm?
Can they say no when
They
you ask
can
them
they
for
can
an
they can say no, but it again, they have to put that in prior written notice and say we're not going to do it. And you know typically, they don't want to get that missed. They don't want to go to due process over that. They may as well just let it happen.
Now, um, so parents, what are the biggest mistake that you, or do's and don'ts, like the things that you see when you're called in and you got to review everything? What is the most common thing that you're seeing that parents are doing that is a no, and that they could do better?
Well, I have parents. Some parents just don't go to the meetings, so that's probably a big one. There's one district that I work with that it's my understanding that 85% of the parents don't attend the ARD meetings. They just let them happen, and the paperwork gets sent home someday. And absolutely blew my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. So that's a big one. Uh, Other things that I've seen is like parents are like, "Well, I really didn't like what they said in the last meeting, but they went so fast, and so I just signed it and it was done." So they signed the paperwork and they haven't reread it or don't know really what it says. They just, went along with, you know, so that this is a contract. That's the way I see it. This is a contract. This is what they are agreeing to do for your child, and the things that they're going to put in place, and it's what you have that's enforceable. I mean, if the accommodations aren't being, completed, if your child's supposed to have reduced assignments or extra time and that's not happening, you have this piece of paper, this contract, so to speak, to go back and say, hey, my child's accommodations aren't being followed with fidelity. Do we need more training for the teachers? Do they even know that this is in place? What can, I mean, you have something to fall back on. It's in writing, it's your contract. But if you don't have it in there, I mean, you don't have that legal binding piece of paper. So really understanding what's in it, reading it, knowing
Yeah.
what's going on, and being okay with it. I mean, if you don't agree with an IEP, I send out a list of tips at the end of my consults with clients, whether they're going to hire me or not. I think it's important that they know some of them. And one of those is, if you don't agree with the IEP, don't sign it in agreement. You can sign in disagreement. It's not going to cut off your kids' services. It just you go on the record saying, I didn't like this. I didn't think
Yeah.
it was okay.
Yeah. No, you don't have to sign it. And then the other thing is, when you don't go to an art, you don't get to put suggestions, because
Mhm.
the school, and this is kind of, I don't want to disparage the schools too much, but the schools have budgetary concerns.
Mhm.
They are gonna do the least possible within the realm of staying in legality and to help. And it's just what I have seen from all these years of dealing with different schools in different states,
Mhm.
from California, Arizona to Texas. And so you run into that situation, and if you're not in the art, you don't know what's being put in there, folks. You don't know. I mean, you could actually, because I've seen in arts, can parents give suggestions on different things for their child?
They can. And what I really encourage with my clients is to get us a copy of the draft that's going to be proposed. I understand it's a draft, and it's just what they're going to propose, but it allows parents and allows me with my clients too to go over what's going to be proposed, and then really try and put it in there in a way that is, I mean, parents have the right to meaningfully participate in the ARD meeting. So for them to do that, they need to know what's coming up. I mean, you get presented with a 54-page document, and you haven't had a chance to pre-read it, and they're just trying to get this meeting done in 30 minutes. I mean, truly an ARD meeting, sadly for, because it just rarely happens. I mean, they're at least an hour and a half. And that's if
Mhm.
we've had a chance to do some collaboration on the front side. I mean, I'd like to get all that back, and I'm like, hey, can we maybe collaborate on these goals, before we even get to the meeting, so that we're not all watching you try and type them, when we're doing these revisions. Or, what about these? We're going to want to discuss these accommodations be added, when we get into the meeting. We want to, I try and collaborate back with them so that they can see, what what we're coming to the table with too. I mean, I don't want to blindside them with a bunch of stuff. It's kind of a collaborative effort. But yeah, so the parents and I get together, we go through, I make sure their needs are out there on the table, and parents can do that without an advocate as well. I mean, get a draft of that IEP, compare it to the one you had last year, see where the progress has been, and make your suggestions or ask your questions. But in order to prepare, you kind of need that draft. You can't prepare without it.
And do you have do they have to legally provide you that draft, or is there in days in between so that parents don't get caught up in that? Because I know there's certain times, everything is kind of has a time, this much for this much, this much for that one.
I try and get it at least 3 to 5 days in advance. Sometimes I don't get all of it. I mean, I like to have a complete draft of the IEP if I can, so I can go through all the pages and make sure that we're in a good place. But most of the time, I can, at the very least, get the present levels of performance. So where they're saying that the kiddo is at this point, and then what goals they're proposing. I also like to see what accommodations they're proposing. That I would say those three are the minimum. And if they're planning some big change in schedule of services, if they're trying to increase or decrease, the services that the kid, I always try to get the schedule of service draft too, just so I know if there's going to be any big surprises. Parents don't like to be surprised in the meeting, but, but other tips I would include, if you're ever surprised at a meeting like that and you really need some time to process it, ask for a recess and to reconvene after. At another time, so that you can go home and think about what they're presenting to you, and not make any rash decisions.
Yeah, I've actually had to do that. You can give yourself time to go through what they're going through. Now, if they're not following, because you had mentioned this, if they're not following that IEP, your kid's not getting the services that they're getting, they're not getting the free and appropriate education. If they're not getting that, what is the parent's recourse?
Well, first of all, I mean, in all fairness to the school, I bring it to their attention. Bring it to, ask the teacher the questions that you need to ask, and move it up the line in the appropriate chain of command, because, administrators don't know what they don't know. Special ed coordinators don't know what they don't know. And if it hadn't been brought to their attention that maybe this teacher doesn't have the training that they need, or this isn't being implemented, then, they can't fix it. So definitely follow that initial chain of command. Try and have an ARD meeting. This isn't happening. I'm not seeing this happen. What can we do to get my kid on the path they need to be? But if that doesn't work, then you could take it to, you can try and bring in a special education advocate. They might be able to help. You can also bring in a special ed lawyer. They are fantastic. They would help with the due process, part of the event, and get them to mediation. I mean, if I always tell clients, if you're going to go into a due process situation, you need to know what relief you're seeking. So if you've gotten to a point and you've really worked with the school, and you've gone through the administrators, and you've pulled in the coordinators, and you just can't get it done, and you're thinking you need private placement at public expense, you have found a school that's private that you want to send your kiddo to, that would be considered relief. Or if they wouldn't do the evaluation, you need this evaluation, completed, or that you need them to consider this. I mean, you need to know what you want to do. It's not just to get them. It's not just because they made you mad and it's a principle of the thing. I mean, you kind of need to know what you're going into it for, because it's stressful and it can be expensive.
Yeah.
but there are those recourses, and mediation on its own that parents can take into that's another thing that you can do here in Texas. A TEA complaint is an option. And then there's OCR complaints as well, the Office of Civil
Well,
Rights.
yeah,
Um,
that's taking it up there, definitely.
so, and then those complaints, I mean, they're all on the TEA website. It's again, if they're not doing something correctly, and discrimination can occur against children with disabilities. So OCR complaints sometimes are a better way to go than a TEA special ed complaint.
Now, has your experience been, working in this in your field and helping these kids? Has your experience been that the schools have been more helpful than not?
I think that most of the time they try to be, yes.
Okay.
There are a few districts that are very difficult to work in, and I think other advocates as well are it's not their first choice when a parent calls from a certain. I mean, because I don't feel like I'm able to get anywhere with them. I really think that they don't know what they don't know, so it becomes very difficult to really feel like I'm doing the parents the justice that they need to do, that they need for their kid. But most of the time, I mean, most teachers are there because they do have a love for kids. Most administrators that are there are the same thing. And sometimes their hands are tied. So I feel like they're as cooperative as a rule with me as possible because we're all on the same side. It's just sometimes their hands are tied on how much they can say. So whereas I can come in and help really advocate for this kid, the teacher may have had her hand slapped because of something. And so secretly she's loving the fact that I'm there to say all the things she wants to say. Um, but couldn't. So I
Yeah.
mean I do feel like, they try. When you bring in a special ed advocate, I found that school districts will often bring in a special ed coordinator. And I love it because they know the law. And in most situations, they, they're there to do the right thing. They don't want it to go any farther. They don't want it to be a lawsuit. They might see that somebody needs training and they have the authority to bring in somebody to take care of an issue that maybe a principal themselves couldn't do because, it wasn't, it was above their
Sure.
influence.
Something that you mentioned earlier that I definitely want the audience to know is that chain of command process. That is very, 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 very important. And I used a lot of varies there, but there's a reason. If you do not follow the process to the letter, their process, then things can be delayed quite a bit. And so you have to follow their process very well when advocating for your child and the steps. You have to know them and you have to go through it when you have a problem with maybe your kid is not receiving something that the IEP, like you were saying, where the teachers weren't there. And I mean, that's just crazy. So with the one thing that I definitely wanted to cover is one of the many manifestations of ADHD, of autism, of learning disabilities, ODD, all of them can be behavioral issues. Behavioral issues are sometimes they're a way to kind of deal with what they're seeing and their perception, and so what I've seen is a lot of kids, they'll get into this discipline. uh, uh, um, I lost the word for it, but it's just kind of they get discipline, and they're out. They're going somewhere else, and so they have these bips that sometimes they include with when you're doing the art and the IEP and stuff. Talk to me about the protection your kids have with behavioral if they're in special needs.
Um, okay. So in the past, I felt like there was a little bit more protection there than there has been lately. Again, we've got just a lack of really strong personnel sometimes that are trained well, that are dedicated to all of our kiddos with special needs. So there used to be more protections there. But as far as the behavior intervention plan, that is in there with the strategies on what somebody's supposed to do. So if a child is at this level, these are the things we should be doing. It's, and if this happens, then this. I mean, it's really kind of like the roadmap for any person in the school. They should have that BIP in hand if they're interceding on that child's behavior. And if not, then the IEP and the behavior intervention plan aren't being followed with fidelity. And you have the options to take that forward in that capacity. But the behavior intervention plan is there for that reason. Now, if most of the behavior intervention plans are going to say the child is still subject to the student code of conduct. So if they've been aggressive and they've hit somebody, and the school, I'm finding now that the school that was part of the child's disability, so they kind of worked that within the class or the environment that student had. Now I'm finding that they suspend them for a day, they send them home for 2 or 3 days, or they decide that they need to go into the district alternative education program, DAEP. So it's becoming a little bit more concerning because after 10 days, that's considered a change of placement, and they are required to do a manifestation determination review to determine if the child's behavior is a manifestation of their disability. So if a child has an emotional disturbance, they throw a chair because they got frustrated, they got suspended, and we've gone through a pattern of behaviors, and he's now been out of placement for 10 days. It accumulates. You may be suspended 1 day, then later 2 days. It's
Yeah.
cumulative. Or they've just decided you're going to DAEP. That's definitely 10 days or more. So they have to do this MDR, manifestation determination review. And how they could find a child that has an emotional disturbance, in their IEP and try and move them to DAEP is beyond me, but it happens. And so sometimes, we've
So,
had lawyers get involved, in those situations because they're just trying to get them out of the school.
Charlotte, at what point do you involve a lawyer?
If I've done everything I can absolutely do, I've, and I'll tell parents, I mean, we can put anything on paper, but whether or not they're going to do it or not is the question. So staying on the school, being involved, being, really trying to pull out that information that they're getting, that they're doing what's supposed to be done is imperative. I mean, for parents to stay kind of focused on that. And if, like I said, we've got the plan in place, we know what needs to be done, they're just not doing it, then at that point, it might be time for a client to consult a lawyer.
I could talk to you all night, but I like to try to keep the shows at half. I'm a little over, and I appreciate you giving me your time. So I'm going to ask you one last question before I give you the mic to talk to the people of Ellis County and beyond. Where would you like to see special education in the next 5-10 years? Since you're in this, you're in the battleground, what would you like to see in the next 5-10 years to make it better?
I mean, I think every teacher has a lot of stuff put on them, with what they need to do in public education. And I think all of our teachers are very much underfunded, unappreciated, not paid what they should be paid or should have been paid all this time. And it's not just because I was a special ed teacher, but there's, there's a special kind of extra something that they need. And I think to really bring in the qualified personnel that we need in our schools, and the ones with these specialties in special education and with this special training that's above and beyond just their teacher training, they need to, there needs to be a stipend, a bonus, or something that really brings in the quality people and helps them want to stay, because it's hard. I mean, we talked about the emotional disturbance piece, and children with that emotional disturbance, they're great kids, but they are difficult to work with, and so that burnout rate is really high. What can we do, to really, incentivize our people and get the best people in working with these kids? It shouldn't be the last resort people. I mean, in order to really make a difference with our kids with special education, and help them grow and to help them reach, their potential and to the highest degree possible. We need good people in there with them. And so I'm hoping that, that would solve a lot of the problems that we have is good people that know the laws, that know how to teach our kiddos and to bring them in there and really have them work hard.
Just to go piggyback on what you said, I was watching a public education hearing in Austin. I was watching the last one, I believe, that happened, and they were talking about special education being about 7 billion in the hole, where schools had to come out extra on special education, and how the rise in special education population is really, pushing a lot of the resources to their limit. So yeah, when that happens, that's when IEPs don't get met, when those things are bad. But as I close out, I want you guys to know I have been scrolling her site so that you guys can get a hold of her. And if you need help with your child, this is her website. Yeah, I got it on there. Nice picture, ma'am. And
Thank
and
you.
you can, Charlotte Dudley, special education advocate. If you need anything, you can contact, and she has her email and phone, and anything you may need to help your kid and get the help that your kid needs, because this can be a very challenging time. Ms. Dudley, I'm going to give you the mic and shut up, to say whatever you need to say to those parents of special needs kiddos.
So I really appreciate y'all letting me be on tonight and to say some of the things that I've already said. I mean, there's just a few tips I really think are really important for all parents, and and some of them I've already shared, but I think you're always going to have a kiddo that you're, and this is whether you have a special needs child or not. Your teacher may come out and say something to you in the car, and or you may be at the grocery store, and you're not going to remember. Take a minute to summarize those email or those conversations and send it email back, just clarifying. It's, hey, I really appreciate your call this afternoon. I was at the grocery store. I just wanted to summarize what we spoke about. When we talked earlier about everything in writing, this just helps you kind of keep track. You can put that in a folder on your email list, so that all those emails go in that same place, but it gives you something to refer back to. So, I mentioned don't ever sign an IEP that you don't agree with, or that you haven't read. So sometimes it's okay to leave that meeting and say, hey, I need that contract. I need that IEP to read first.
Yeah. I mean, folks, everything in writing. I actually still have recordings, because you can record, you have to ask, you have to let them know, but you can actually record these meetings so that you can go back and listen to what was said. And so those are just, some of the tips that you can do. Ma'am, I appreciate you so much. Thank you. So very few people can say that they help humanity for a living, and that's what you're doing, helping these special needs kids who really, really need you. A special needs advocate, help my youngest child who's in now 30. Help my other kid, my middle kid who's autistic. Help me become an advocate for my child. Actually helped my wife when she was pregnant with my oldest kid in school, and passed on recently. And we loved him very much, and he helped kids. That's what he did. He helped kids
Mhm.
his whole life, and even getting ready to pass, he was helping kids. So people like you are special, and I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for what you do. Can you stick around real quick?
Sure. No, absolutely. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Bye bye.